The ink on the settlement papers wasn't even dry when Blake Mercer ordered the most expensive bottle of Dom Perignon the downtown bar had in stock. He thought the war was over. He thought he had crushed the woman who had stood by him for 10 years, leaving her with nothing but a rusted sedan and a broken heart. He laughed, checked his watch, and texted his mistress that he was finally a free man. But Blake forgot the golden rule of warfare: never celebrate until the enemy is buried. He didn't know that the trembling woman, sitting across from him in the courtroom, wasn't crying because she was weak. She was crying because she knew who was walking through those double doors next. And when her father entered the room, Blake's victory didn't just evaporate, it turned into a life sentence. Blake Mercer checked his reflection in the pristine glass of the elevators at the pulsing heart of the city's financial district. His bespoke navy suit, tailored by a man who didn't advertise to the public, fit him like a second skin. He adjusted his silk tie, a crimson red, that he jokingly referred to as his power color, though today it felt more like a victory flag. It was 11:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. Most men were buried in spreadsheets or responding to urgent emails. Blake was heading to Le Ciel, the rooftop lounge overlooking the sprawling urban jungle, to meet Derek Soloway. Derek wasn't just his attorney. He was the architect of what Blake considered his masterpiece, the absolute, total, and systematic dismantling of his wife, Eliana. The elevator chimed. Blake stepped out, the midday sun hitting him. Derek was already there, nursing a Scotch neat. "To the Conqueror," Derek said, raising his glass as Blake approached. A smirk played on the lawyer's thin lips. Blake laughed, dropping into the leather armchair opposite him. "Is it done? Is the judge locked in?" "Judge Harriet Moore is a stickler for procedure, but the paperwork is bulletproof," Derek assured him, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table. "We've hidden the offshore accounts in the shell company in the Caymans. The house is technically owned by the trust which you control but don't own on paper. And Eliana. Her lawyer, that nice old lady Margaret Prentice, she barely filed a counter motion. It was pathetic, Blake. Truly. It was like taking candy from a baby." Blake signaled the waiter. "Bottle of the 08 vintage. 2 glasses." He turned back to Derek, his eyes cold. "Eliana was always soft. That's why I married her, and that's why I'm leaving her. She's happy with mediocrity. She thinks saving coupons is financial planning. I needed someone with appetite." He pulled out his phone. A message from Jessica flashed on the screen. "Did you crush her yet?" "I have the celebratory dinner booked at 8. Blake typed back. "Consider her crushed. See you tonight." "You know," Blake said, leaning back as the waiter poured the bubbling gold liquid. "I almost feel bad. Almost. She looked so pale at the deposition last week. She kept looking at the door, like someone was going to come save her. Her parents are deadbeats from the Midwest, right? Some corn farmers or something." Derek shrugged, taking a sip. "According to the background check we ran when you got married, father is retired. Mother passed away 5 years ago. No assets, no connections. The father Arthur hasn't been seen in years, probably in a nursing home. Eliana is alone, Blake. Totally isolated." "Good," Blake said, taking a long drink. The champagne tasted like success. "I want her out of the house by Friday. I want Jessica moving in by Saturday. Make sure the eviction notice is served the second the gavel hits. You're a cold son of a bitch, Mercer." Derek chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm a winner, Derek," Blake corrected him. "There's a difference." They spent the next hour laughing over the details. How they had undervalued the art collection. How Blake had funneled the joint savings into a failed investment venture that was actually sitting in a secure account in Zurich. They dissected Eliana's naivety, mocking her silence, her dowdy clothes and her refusal to fight dirty. But as Blake drained his third glass, a strange feeling prickled the back of his neck. It was the sensation of being watched. He turned around, scanning the crowded lounge. Businessmen, tourists, servers. No one was looking at him. "Paranoid?" Derek asked. "No." Blake straightened his jacket. "Just eager. Let's get to the courthouse. I want to see the look on her face when Judge Moore reads the final decree." They paid the exorbitant tab and left, strutting out like kings of the world. They didn't notice the grey sedan parked across the street or the man in the driver's seat snapping a photo of them laughing. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old wood, a scent that usually intimidated people. For Blake, it smelled like opportunity. He sat at the defense table checking his cuticles, looking bored. On the other side of the aisle sat Eliana. She looked smaller than he remembered. She was wearing a simple grey cardigan and black slacks off the rack, cheap. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was loose today, framing a face that was pale and drawn. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at her hands, which were clasped tightly together on the table. Next to her was Margaret Prentice. The lawyer looked like a grandmother who had wandered into a legal proceeding by mistake. She was shuffling papers, her glasses slipping down her nose. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harriet Moore swept in, her black robes billowing. She was a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for efficiency. She sat down, adjusted her microphone, and peered over her spectacles at the two parties. "We are here for the final dissolution of marriage between Blake Mercer and Eliana Mercer." Judge Moore said, her voice echoing slightly. "I understand there is a settlement agreement on the table proposed by Mr. Mercer's counsel." Derek stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. A very generous settlement considering the circumstances. Mr. Mercer is offering spousal support for 6 months, and he is graciously allowing Mrs. Mercer to keep her personal vehicle. In exchange, Mr. Mercer retains the marital home and all business assets, which, as we have demonstrated, were acquired prior to the marriage or through sole effort. It was a lie, of course. The business had been built on a loan Eliana had taken out in her name 10 years ago, a loan she had paid off by working 2 jobs while Blake played CEO. But the paper trail had been doctored so well that the truth was buried under mountains of legal jargon. "Mrs. Mercer," the judge looked at Eliana, "does your counsel have any objections?" Margaret Prentice stood up slowly. Her hand trembled slightly. "Your Honor, we have reservations regarding the disclosure of assets." Derek scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. We have provided thousands of pages of financial discovery. If Mrs. Mercer's counsel hasn't read them, that is not my client's problem." Blake smirked. He looked at Eliana. "Give up," he mouthed. Eliana looked up. For the first time that day, her eyes met his. There was no sadness in them. There was fear, yes, but underneath it, something else. "Pity, Miss Prentice," Judge Moore said, sounding impatient. "Do you have evidence of hidden assets, or are we proceeding?" "We are waiting on a witness, Your Honor," Margaret said softly. "A witness?" Derek interrupted. "This isn't a criminal trial. Who could you possibly call that would change the financials?" "My father," Eliana whispered. Blake laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter that caused the judge to glare at him. "Your father," Blake hissed, leaning over. "Eliana, your father is a corn farmer from Iowa who hasn't sent you a birthday card in a decade. What's he going to do? Bring us some corn." "Order." Judge Moore banged the gavel. Mr. Mercer, control yourself." "Apologies, Your Honor," Blake said, smoothing his tie, though he was still grinning. "I'm just baffled. We are wasting the court's time." "My father is not a farmer," Eliana said, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. She looked at the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. "And he's not from Iowa." "We have a schedule to keep," Judge Moore said, looking at the clock. "If this witness is not here in the next 60 seconds, I am ruling on the motion to dismiss your claims, Ms. Prentice." "He's here," Margaret said, checking her phone. Blake rolled his eyes. He turned to Derek. "Watch this. The old man is probably going to come in here in overalls and beg me not to leave his daughter. It's going to be pathetic." The courtroom fell silent. The second hand on the wall clock ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. 50 seconds. Blake checked his phone. Jessica had sent a photo of a lingerie set. He smiled. 30 seconds. Derek was already packing his briefcase. "Judge, really?" 10 seconds. Then it happened. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were pushed open with a force that made the hinges groan. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with a sudden suffocating pressure. 2 men in dark suits walked in first. They weren't bailiffs. They were private security high-end earpieces, eyes scanning the room like predators. They stepped aside. A man walked through the doors. He was not wearing overalls. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Blake's car. He leaned on a cane topped with a silver hawk's head, but he didn't look like he needed it. He looked like he used it to point at things he wanted to destroy. His hair was silver swept back. His face was lined, but his eyes steel gray and piercing were terrifyingly sharp. Blake felt his smile falter. He didn't know this man, but he knew the type. This was the kind of man who didn't wait for tables at restaurants. This was the kind of man who bought the restaurant to fire the waiter. The man walked down the center aisle. His steps were slow, deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of the cane hitting the floor echoed like gunshots. He stopped at the railing behind the plaintiff's table. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked directly at Blake. Blake felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Who is this?" Derek whispered, his voice losing its arrogant edge. Eliana stood up. She turned to the man. Her lip trembled. "Daddy." The man looked at her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second, before hardening again as he turned his gaze to the bench. "State your name for the record," Judge Moore said, though she looked unusually alert, sitting straighter in her chair. The man placed both hands on the head of his cane. His voice was a deep rumble, like thunder on the horizon. "My name is Arthur J. Caldwell," he said, "and I am the majority shareholder of the Phoenix Group." Derek Soloway dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the table. Blake froze. The Phoenix Group. The massive conglomerate that owned the venture capital firm Blake worked for. The firm that... Wait. Blake's brain scrambled to make the connection. If this man owned the Phoenix Group, then technically... Arthur Caldwell smiled. It was not a nice smile. "And I believe, Mr. Mercer, that you have been trying to steal my money." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb has been dropped, but the explosion hasn't hit the ears yet. Derek Soloway, usually the picture of slick confidence, was staring at Arthur Caldwell with his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a man who had brought a knife to a nuclear war. He leaned over to Blake, his whisper frantic and wet with spit. "Blake," Derek hissed. "Do you know who that is? That's the C in C&H Partners. He owns half the city. If he owns Phoenix Group—" "He's lying," Blake snapped through his voice cracked. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, trying to regain the dominance he had held just 3 minutes ago. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This man is an imposter. Eliana's father is a nobody. I've seen the tax returns. I've seen the—" "Sit down, Mr. Mercer," Judge Moore said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of iron. She turned her gaze to Arthur. "Mr. Caldwell, you made a serious accusation. You claimed Mr. Mercer is stealing from you." Arthur Caldwell didn't take the witness stand. He didn't need to. He simply motioned to one of the suited men behind him. The man stepped forward and placed a thick, leather-bound binder on the judge's bench, then another on the defense table in front of a horrified Derek. "I am not a witness to the divorce, Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice smooth and cold. "I am an intervenor. My daughter Eliana has been too proud to ask for my help for 10 years. She wanted to make it on her own. She married a man she thought loved her." Arthur's eyes flicked to Blake, filled with a contempt so deep it felt physical. "Instead, she married a parasite." "Objection," Derek yelped, standing up. "This is character assassination." "It's not assassination if it's true," Arthur countered calmly. "Open the binder, Mr. Soloway. Page 4. Derek hesitated, his hands shaking. He flipped the page. His face went grey. "What is it?" Blake demanded, grabbing the binder. He looked at the page. It was a bank statement. His bank statement. The one for the offshore account in the Caymans. The one he had paid a fortune to keep hidden. "How did you get this?" Blake whispered. Arthur leaned forward, resting his weight on his cane. "You consider yourself a financial genius, don't you, Blake? You moved $3 million of marital assets into a shell company called Apex Ventures last month. You thought Apex was a ghost ship, a safe haven where you could stash your loot until the divorce was final." Arthur smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like grin. "Who do you think owns Apex Ventures, Blake?" Blake felt the room spin. No, that's impossible. My broker said—" "Your broker works for me," Arthur said. "He has worked for me for 20 years. When you approached him asking for a place to hide money from my daughter, he called me. I told him to help you. I told him to give you the account number for Apex." Arthur paused for effect, letting the reality sink in. "You didn't hide that money, son. You deposited it directly into my personal holding company. You didn't steal it from Eliana. You gave it to me." The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the back row who had been dozing off were now furiously typing on their phones. Judge Moore was banging her gavel, but even she looked stunned. "Order, order," Judge Moore shouted. She looked at the binder in front of her. "Mr. Caldwell, are you saying that the defendant knowingly transferred marital assets to a company you control?" "I'm saying he attempted to defraud this court and his wife," Arthur said. "And in doing so, he accidentally returned the funds to the family. That $3 million is currently sitting in a trust fund for Eliana. It is safe, however." Arthur's expression darkened. "That is only the money he tried to hide during the divorce. What I am more interested in, and what the district attorney will be interested in." Blake's heart hammered against his ribs. "District attorney, is the money he has been siphoning from the Phoenix Group's operational budget for the last 3 years to fund his lifestyle." Derek Soloway physically moved his chair away from Blake. It was a subtle move, but in the legal world it was a death sentence. The lawyer was distancing himself from the client. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Blake stammered. I'm a top performer. Your numbers are cooked, Arthur said. You've been inflating vendor contracts and taking kickbacks. We've been tracking it for 6 months. We were waiting for you to make a mistake, and filing for divorce, trying to leave my daughter with nothing while you ran off with your mistress. That was the mistake. Arthur turned to the judge. Your Honor, the Phoenix Group is freezing all assets held by Mr. Mercer pending a criminal investigation. He doesn't have the money to pay Mr. Soloway. He doesn't have the money to pay for his lease. In fact, as of this morning, the suit he is wearing is technically evidence in a grand larceny case. Blake looked down at his bespoke suit. Suddenly, it felt like a prison uniform. Blake Mercer had spent his entire life building a fortress of lies. He was charming, he was ruthless, and he believed he was untouchable. But narcissists have a singular weakness. They cannot handle humiliation. As the reality of Arthur's words settled over the courtroom, Blake didn't feel remorse. He didn't feel fear. He felt a blinding, white-hot rage. He looked at Eliana. She was still standing, her hand gripping her father's arm. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at him. And for the first time in years, she didn't look afraid. She looked disappointed. You set me up, Blake snarled. He ignored Derek's hand, trying to pull him down. You planned this. You played the victim. I didn't plan anything, Blake, Eliana said softly. Her voice was clear, cutting through the tension. I just told my dad the truth, for the first time. The truth? Blake laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. The truth is, you're boring, Eliana. You're a dead weight. I carried you. I made you who you are. He pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. And you think you can walk in here and scare me. I know the law. You can't just seize my assets without a hearing. I'll sue you. I'll sue the Phoenix Group. I'll take everything. Judge Moore's face was stone. Mr. Mercer, sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt. I am the victim here, Blake screamed, slamming his fist on the table. I earned that money. I worked 80-hour weeks while she sat at home painting her little pictures. She deserves nothing. She's a leech. Mr. Mercer. The judge beckoned the bailiff, but Arthur held up a hand. Let him speak, Your Honor. It's important for the record. It's important for Eliana to hear this. Blake turned on Eliana, his eyes wild. You think this changes anything? You think he can buy your happiness? You'll still be the same pathetic woman who couldn't keep a husband. You think I'm the only one? Everyone laughs at you, Eliana. My friends, my colleagues. Jessica. He said the name like a weapon. Jessica knows how to please a man. Jessica has class. She's waiting for me right now, and when I get out of this, I'm going to marry her, and we're going to live in my house, and you're going to be living in your daddy's guest room. Eliana took a step forward. She let go of her father's arm. She walked up to the railing just a few feet from Blake. Jessica isn't waiting for you, Blake, Eliana said. Blake sneered. What do you know? I know because she called me this morning, Eliana said. Blake froze. You're lying. She saw the news, Eliana continued. Or rather, she saw the foreclosure notice taped to the door of the penthouse you bought for her. Arthur cleared his throat. The penthouse is owned by a subsidiary of the Phoenix Group Blake, corporate housing. When we terminated your employment effective 9:00 a.m. this morning, we also terminated the lease. Security escorted Miss Jessica Vance off the premises an hour ago. Blake looked at his phone. It had been silent for 20 minutes. He unlocked it with trembling fingers. He saw a text from Jessica. You told me you owned it. You told me you were rich. Security gave me 10 minutes to pack. Don't ever contact me again, you loser. Loser! The word burned itself into his retinas. Blake looked up. The courtroom was spinning. The walls felt like they were closing in. He looked at Derek Soloway. Fix this. Blake pleaded, his voice suddenly small like a child's. Derek, fix this. Derek Soloway stood up. He picked up his briefcase. He looked at Judge Moore. Your Honor, I am filing a motion to withdraw as counsel, Derek said efficiently. It appears my client has been less than truthful regarding his financial standing. And given that his assets are frozen, I do not believe he can fulfill his retainer agreement. Granted, Judge Moore said instantly. Derek. Blake grabbed the lawyer's sleeve. You can't leave me. We're a team. Derek peeled Blake's fingers off his jacket as if they were covered in slime. We aren't a team, Blake. I'm a lawyer. You're a liability. And honestly, Derek leaned in. His voice dropping to a whisper that the microphones still caught. I never liked you. Derek walked out. Blake was alone at the defense table. Judge Moore adjusted her glasses. She looked at Blake with the kind of expression one reserves for a cockroach found in a salad. Mr. Mercer, you are currently unrepresented. You are facing allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and perjury. Do you wish to say anything else before I issue my ruling on the divorce settlement? Blake looked at the door. He looked at Arthur, who was watching him with a calm, satisfied expression. He looked at Eliana. Eliana wasn't looking at him with hate. She was looking at him with closure. She turned her back on him and walked back to her father. Blake slumped in his chair. The fight had left him. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow terror. No, Blake whispered. Very well, Judge Moore said. She picked up her pen. In light of the new evidence presented by Mr. Caldwell and the defendant's admission of hidden assets, she began to read the judgment. It was a massacre. She awarded Eliana the house. She awarded Eliana the car. She awarded Eliana 100% of the marital assets as punitive damages for Blake's attempt to hide funds. And regarding the $3 million in the Apex account, Judge Moore said, peering over her glasses, since the defendant voluntarily transferred these funds to a third party, and that third party has gifted them to the plaintiff, the court sees no reason to interfere. The money belongs to Mrs. Mercer. She banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. Officers, I believe the gentlemen from the district attorney's office are waiting in the hallway. Blake's head snapped up. The doors opened again. But this time, it wasn't a rich father walking in. It was 2 police officers holding a pair of handcuffs. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is a distinct mechanical noise. It is the sound of freedom ending. For Blake Mercer, it was the loudest sound he had ever heard. Blake Mercer, the older of the 2 officers, said, his voice bored and practiced. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Blake didn't remain silent. Get your hands off me, he shrieked, twisting his torso. The bespoke fabric of his jacket strained against the metal cuffs. Do you know who I am? I am a vice president at Phoenix Group. This is a misunderstanding. I want my lawyer. Your lawyer just left Buddy, the officer said, shoving Blake gently but firmly toward the aisle. Watch your head. The walk from the defense table to the courtroom doors was only about 30 feet, but for Blake it felt like a mile across burning coals. He looked desperately at the gallery. The reporters were no longer typing. They were filming. Their phones were raised like a firing squad, capturing every second of his humiliation. He knew that within minutes This footage would be trending. Tat Mercer meltdown. He looked for a friendly face. Any face. But the room was a sea of judgment. Even the bailiff looked at him with disdain. As he passed the plaintiff's table, Blake slowed down. He looked at Arthur Caldwell. The older man was leaning on his cane, watching the spectacle with the impassive gaze of a judge who had already signed the execution order. "Arthur," Blake gasped, sweat stinging his eyes. "Please, it was just business. We can work this out. I can pay it back. I have contacts. I can double your investment in a year. Just tell them to stop." Arthur didn't blink. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. He dabbed the corner of his mouth, then turned his back on Blake to speak to his daughter. "Eliana," Blake cried out, his voice cracking. "Eliana, tell him I'm your husband. You can't let them take me to jail. I'll die in there." Eliana didn't turn around. She was looking at her father, a small, sad smile on her face, as Arthur tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She was already gone. She was already miles away from him, safe in a world he could no longer touch. "Let's go, Mercer," the officer grunted, hauling him forward. They dragged him through the heavy wooden doors. The hallway was worse. It was lined with people lawyers, clerks, people waiting for traffic court. They all stopped to watch the man in the expensive suit being frog-marched by the police. "Is that Blake Mercer?" someone whispered. "The guy from the 40 under 40 list. Yeah, looks like he's going to be on the most wanted list now." Laughter. Cruel, sharp laughter. It followed him down the corridor into the elevator and down to the holding cells in the basement. The cell was cold. It smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies. They took his tie. They took his belt. They took his shoelaces. When they took his phone, he felt a phantom vibration. Was it Jessica? Was she apologizing? Was she coming to bail him out? He sat on the metal bench. His suit rumpled his expensive shoes, flopping loosely on his feet. He stared at the concrete wall. Hours passed. Eventually, a public defender showed up. He was a young man with a stained tie and tired eyes. He didn't look like Derek Soloway. He looked like a man who was drowning in cases. "Mr. Mercer," the lawyer asked, not bothering to sit down. "I'm appointed to represent you for the arraignment. Bail is set at $5 million. $5 million, Blake choked. My accounts are frozen. I can't access that kind of liquidity." "Then you'll remain in custody until trial," the lawyer said, closing his folder. "Also, I should warn you, the DA isn't just looking at the embezzlement. They're looking at tax evasion. And since your ex-wife just handed over all your hidden financial records to the court, they have a road map of every illegal transaction you've made in the last 7 years. It's not looking good." "Can I make a call?" Blake asked, his voice trembling. "I need to call Jessica Vance. She has money. She'll help." The lawyer sighed and handed him a phone. "Make it quick." Blake dialed the number he knew by heart. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Blake lowered the phone slowly. Disconnected. She hadn't just blocked him. She had erased him. She had cut the line and run, taking whatever jewelry and gifts he had given her, leaving him to rot. He sat back on the cold bench. The silence of the cell was heavy, suffocating. For the first time in his life, Blake Mercer was truly alone. He closed his eyes, and the image of Eliana in the courtroom flashed in his mind, her quiet dignity, her strength. He had spent 10 years trying to make her feel small so he could feel big. And in the end, She had grown into a giant, and he had shrunk into nothing. He put his head in his hands and wept, not for what he had done, but for what he had lost, and for the terrifying realization that the nightmare was just beginning. The air outside the courthouse tasted sweeter than the most expensive champagne Blake had ever bought. It tasted like rain and asphalt, and most importantly, freedom. Eliana stood on the steps taking a deep breath. Her lungs, which had felt compressed for a decade, finally expanded fully. The grey sedan was parked at the curb, but behind it was a sleek black limousine. Arthur Caldwell stood beside her, his cane tapping rhythmically on the concrete. He didn't look like the titan of industry right now. He just looked like a dad. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he said quietly. It was the nickname he hadn't used since she was 12. Eliana looked at him. "For what? For staying away?" Arthur said, his voice gruff with emotion. I thought you needed to learn on your own. I thought if I interfered you would resent me. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know he was suffocating you." "I didn't tell you," Eliana said, taking his hand. "I was too proud. I wanted to prove I could have a perfect marriage without your money. I wanted to be different from Mom." Arthur winced slightly at the mention of her mother, a socialite who had loved the lifestyle more than the man. "You are different, Eliana. You have a heart. That's why you stayed. You kept hoping he would change. You have too much hope." "I think I'm all out of hope for Blake," she said, looking back at the courthouse doors. "But I have plenty left for myself." "So," Arthur said, gesturing to the limousine. "Where to my place, the Ritz, Paris?" Eliana smiled. "Home, Dad. I want to go home." "To that house?" Arthur frowned. "The one he lived in?" "It's my house now," Eliana said firmly. "And I have some redecorating to do." They drove to the sprawling suburban estate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. When they arrived, Eliana saw Blake's sports car in the driveway. It looked garish and out of place now, a relic of a regime that had fallen. She unlocked the front door. The house was quiet. It usually felt empty and cold, a museum of Blake's ego. But as she walked in, she felt a shift. The shadows didn't seem as long. "I'll have a crew here in an hour," Arthur said, looking around the foyer with a critical eye. "We can box up his things, send them to storage, or the dump." "The dump," Eliana said. "Definitely the dump." She walked into the living room. On the wall hung a massive abstract painting Blake had bought for $50,000 just to impress a client. He hated it. He used to make fun of it when he was drunk. Eliana walked over to it. She grabbed the frame with both hands. It was heavy, but she felt a surge of adrenaline. She lifted it off the hook and let it drop. Crash! The sound of the frame splintering and the canvas tearing was electric. Arthur chuckled from the doorway. "That's a start." Eliana turned to him. "You know, he always told me my art was a waste of time. He said watercolor was for children." "He was an idiot," Arthur said. "I still have the landscape you painted for my 50th birthday hanging in my office. It's the only thing in that room that makes me smile." Eliana felt tears prick her eyes. "Really? Really?" Arthur said. "And I have a proposition for you." Eliana wiped her eyes. "I don't need a handout, Dad." "It's not a handout. It's a job." Arthur walked over to the shattered painting and nudged it with his cane. "The Phoenix Group sponsors a massive art initiative. We fund galleries, scholarships, restoration projects. But it's been mismanaged. The director had no eye for talent. He was just buying status symbols." Arthur looked at her. I need someone who knows art. Someone who knows the soul of it, not just the price tag. I need a director of cultural affairs. The board will vote you in tomorrow if I say the word. But you have to earn it. It's real work. Eliana looked at her hands, the hands Blake had called useless, the hands that had cooked his meals, cleaned his house, and wiped away her own tears for 10 years. I can do it, she said. Her voice was strong. I know you can, Arthur said. But first, he pointed to the stairs. Go upstairs. Pack a bag. You're not staying here tonight. Tonight we celebrate. A real celebration. Not that fake champagne Blake drank. Eliana ran upstairs. She went into the master bedroom. It smelled like his cologne, acrid and overpowering. She walked into the closet. His suits were lined up like soldiers. His shoes were polished. It was a shrine to a man who didn't exist. She grabbed a suitcase. She didn't pack any of the clothes he had bought her, the tight dresses, the uncomfortable heels. She packed her jeans, her old paint-stained t-shirts, her comfortable sneakers. As she reached for her jewelry box, she saw something tucked in the back of the drawer, a small velvet pouch. She opened it. Inside was a diamond necklace. It was stunning, heavy. There was a note attached. For Jessica. Happy anniversary. Eliana stared at it. An anniversary gift for his mistress, hidden in the drawer of the wife he was divorcing. A month ago, this would have broken her. It would have sent her spiraling into a depression for weeks. Now Eliana laughed. It was a genuine, belly-deep laugh. She took the necklace and the note. She walked downstairs. Dad, yes, honey. Do we have a fireplace? We do, Arthur said, eyeing the necklace. Eliana walked to the living room fireplace. She turned on the gas. The flames flickered to life. She tossed the note in first. It curled and blackened instantly. Then she held the necklace over the flames. Wait, Arthur said. That's a $20,000 necklace, Eliana. Even I don't burn money. Eliana paused. She looked at the diamonds, sparkling in the firelight. You're right, she said. She pulled it back. Burning it gives him too much power. It makes it dramatic. She dropped the necklace into her purse. I'll pawn it, she said with a grin. And I'll donate the money to a women's shelter, specifically a shelter for victims of financial abuse. Arthur beamed. That's my girl. They walked out of the house together. Eliana locked the door. She didn't look back. She got into the limousine, and as the car pulled away, she watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror. It was just a building now. The prison was gone. So, Eliana said, settling into the leather seat. Tell me about this art director job. I have some ideas about a scholarship for single mothers. Arthur smiled, opening a folder on the seat between them. I was hoping you'd say that. Let's get to work. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the skyline. Somewhere in a dark cell, Blake Mercer was staring at a concrete wall. But in the back of a limousine, speeding toward a new future, Eliana Mercer was just beginning to see the light. Time is a cruel architect. It dismantles arrogance brick by brick. 12 months had passed since the gavel fell in Judge Moore's courtroom, but for Blake Mercer, the distance couldn't be measured in days or weeks. It was measured in the chasm between the man he used to be and the ghost he had become. The service corridor of the Grand Meridian Hotel smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and the nervous sweat of minimum wage workers. Blake stood near the swinging metal doors, adjusting his bow tie. It wasn't the silk charvette ties he used to collect. It was a cheap clip-on polyester loop, that chafed his neck, a constant scratching reminder of his new station in life. Prison had been a nightmare of noise and confinement, a 6-month descent into a hell where his net worth meant nothing. But in a way, his release had been worse. The plea deal, 18 months suspended after 6 for good behavior and overcrowding, came with a 5-year probation tail that felt like a leash around his throat. The restitution order was the true life sentence, nearly $4 million owed to the Phoenix Group and the IRS. He was barred from the finance industry. His trading license was revoked. His reputation was radioactive. The only employment his parole officer could secure for him was with a high-volume event catering company, one of the few places that didn't run deep background checks on the back-of-house staff. "Mercer, wake up!" The shout came from the floor manager, a 20-year-old with a Napoleon complex and a clipboard. "Table 4 is dry. Get the water pitchers. Now!" "I'm going," Blake muttered, keeping his eyes on the scuffed tips of his mandatory non-slip shoes. He hefted the heavy silver tray, the condensation from the pitchers chilling his hands. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. He had to push through the double doors. He had to cross the threshold from the grime of the kitchen into the dazzling world he used to rule. He pushed the doors open. The ballroom hit him like a physical blow. The air was perfumed with expensive lilies and the subtle metallic scent of money. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over 500 of the city's elite. A live orchestra played a soft, swelling waltz. Blake kept his head down, his beard grown to hide his face, itching in the heat. He moved like a shadow, weaving through the tables, filling glasses, terrified that someone would look up and see the former vice president of Apex Ventures pouring their tap water. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the high-fidelity speakers, silencing the murmur of the crowd. "Please take your seats. The evening is just beginning." Blake froze near a pillar. He knew he should retreat to the shadows of the kitchen, but something rooted him to the spot. "Tonight we celebrate a renaissance," the announcer continued. "Please welcome the woman who made tonight possible, the visionary behind the new Phoenix Cultural Initiative, Ms. Eliana Caldwell." The applause was thunderous. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a roar of genuine admiration. Spotlights swept across the darkened room, converging on the stage. And there she was, Eliana. Blake felt the air leave his lungs. He remembered her in grey cardigans and sensible shoes, shrinking into the background. The woman on stage was a stranger. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue velvet that caught the light with every movement. Her hair, once pulled back tight, cascaded in soft waves. She stood at the podium, not with arrogance, but with a grounded magnetic power. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen who had built her throne from the ashes of a war. "Thank you," Eliana said. Her voice was warm, amplified through the room, clear and unwavering. "Tonight isn't just about art. It's about resilience. It's about taking the broken pieces of our past, the things we thought were ruined, and making something beautiful out of them. We often think that our scars define us, but I've learned that they are merely the starting lines for who we are meant to become." Blake felt a physical ache in his chest, a mixture of regret and jealousy so potent it almost brought him to his knees. She was talking about herself. She was talking about him. But while he was drowning in the wreckage, she had learned to swim. He turned sharply, desperate to flee. He couldn't watch this. He couldn't witness her victory while he wore a servant's uniform. But in his haste, he didn't check his blind spot. He collided with a guest stepping out from a table. Water sloshed over the rim of the pitcher, splashing onto the guest's sleeve. "Watch it, you idiot," the man snapped, brushing at his tuxedo jacket. "I'm sorry, sir, Blake stammered, grabbing a napkin from his tray. The guest looked up. The irritation on his face vanished, replaced by a look of stunned recognition. It was Derek Soloway. Blake's former lawyer looked older, his hairline receding, but he still wore the same smug expression that had cost Blake everything. Derek squinted, tilting his head. "Blake?" Derek chuckled. The sound disbelief mixed with cruel delight. "My God, is that you?" Heads at the nearby table turned. A few whispers rippled through the air. "Is that him?" The embezzler. "Excuse me." Blake whispered, his face burning. He tried to push past, but Derek stepped in his path. No, don't rush off," Derek said, his voice loud enough to attract attention. He grabbed Blake's arm, his grip condescending. "I heard you were out. Serving water now. Well, I suppose it's fitting. You always were good at liquidation." "Let me go, Derek," Blake hissed, shaking with humiliation. "You know—" Derek leaned in close, his breath smelling of aged scotch and malice. "I should thank you. After your case imploded, I got a lot of press. Arthur Caldwell was so impressed with how quickly I turned on you that he hired my firm for his corporate compliance work. I'm working for her now." He gestured toward Eliana on the stage. The irony was suffocating. Everyone had moved on. Everyone had profited from his fall. He was the carcass the vultures had fed on to grow stronger. "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind them. It was deep rumbling and instantly commanding. Derek immediately let go of Blake's arm and straightened his posture. "Mr. Caldwell, no problem at all. Just catching up with an old acquaintance." Arthur Caldwell stood there, leaning on his silver-headed cane. He looked at Derek, his expression unreadable. Then he turned his gaze to the waiter. Blake braced himself. He waited for the insults. He waited for Arthur to call security, to make a scene, to point a finger and laugh. He deserved it. He knew he deserved it. But Arthur just looked at him. There was no anger in the old man's eyes. There was no hate. There was only a profound, crushing indifference. Arthur looked at Blake the way one looks at a smudge on a window pane, something mildly annoying but ultimately insignificant. "The service here is usually better," Arthur said to Derek, turning his back on Blake completely. "Come, Derek. Eliana is about to make the toast. You don't want to miss it." Arthur walked away. He didn't even wait to see if Blake was listening. Blake stood there trembling in the wake of their departure. Being hated would have been bearable. Hate implies you still matter. But being irrelevant, being invisible. That was a death sentence for a man who had lived for applause. Panic clawed at his throat. He couldn't breathe. The walls of the ballroom felt like they were closing in the crystals of the chandeliers, sharpening into daggers. He threw the silver tray onto a service table with a clatter that no one noticed over the applause. He ripped off the apron. He stormed toward the exit, pushing through the heavy service doors, past the startled kitchen staff, and out into the loading dock. He burst into the alleyway, gasping for air. It was raining, a cold, steady drizzle that soaked his cheap shirt instantly. He leaned against the brick wall, sliding down until he was crouching on the wet pavement, his head in his hands. "Going somewhere?" The voice was soft, but it cut through the sound of the rain. Blake spun around, scrambling to his feet. Eliana was standing near the stage door, sheltered by the awning. She must have stepped out for a moment of quiet after her speech. She was holding a glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the dim light of the street lamp. She looked at him. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. "Eliana," Blake choked out, wiping rainwater from his eyes. I didn't know. I didn't know you were speaking. I'm leaving. I'm gone. You look tired, Blake, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was just factual, an observation of a stranger. I'm working, he spat, trying to salvage a shred of dignity, though he knew it was futile. Honest work. Something you wouldn't know about. Eliana took a slow sip of her drink. I know plenty about work. I spent 10 years working to keep a narcissist happy. I spent 10 years walking on eggshells, painting over bruises and pretending everything was fine. That was the hardest job of my life. She reached into her beaded clutch. Blake flinched instinctively, expecting a weapon, or perhaps her phone to call the police. Instead, she pulled out a small white business card. She didn't hand it to him. She flicked it toward him. It fluttered through the damp air and landed on the wet pavement between them. What is this? He asked, staring at the white rectangle. My department is launching a program for ex-convicts, she said, her tone professional detached. Rehabilitation through the arts, set design, carpentry, heavy lifting. It pays better than catering, and it has health benefits. Blake stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. You want to give me a job? I don't want to give you anything, Eliana said coldly. But I believe in second chances, even for people who don't deserve them. She turned to go back inside her blue dress, swishing softly. Why? Blake shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of confusion and shame. After everything I did to you, I tried to destroy you, I tried to leave you with nothing. Why would you help me? Eliana paused at the heavy metal door. She looked back over her shoulder, the warm golden light from the ballroom framing her silhouette against the dark, rainy alley. Because, Blake, she said softly, the best revenge isn't destroying you. It's showing you that I don't need to destroy you to be happy. You're not my enemy anymore. You're not my husband. You're just a memory. And I'm finally ready to forget you. The heavy metal door clicked shut. Blake was left alone in the alley. The rain fell harder now, washing away the grime of the city, washing away the facade he had held onto for so long. He looked down at the card on the wet ground. It was a lifeline, a humiliating, merciful lifeline thrown by the woman he had underestimated, the woman he had broken, who had somehow put herself back together, stronger than before. He stood there for a long time. Then slowly, painfully, Blake Mercer bent down. His knees hit the wet asphalt. He reached out and picked up the card. He wasn't a winner anymore. He wasn't a king. Ooh, but for the first time in his life, as he held the card in his dirty hands, he finally understood what it meant to be a man. And that is how the mighty Blake Mercer fell, not by a bullet, a fist, or a hostile takeover, but by the quiet, unshakable strength of the woman he underestimated. He thought he was playing a game of chess, capturing pawns and hoarding gold. He never realized that while he was playing games, Eliana was building a life. In the end, the courtroom wasn't a battleground for money. It was an arena for truth. Blake lost his fortune, his reputation, and his freedom. But he gained the one thing he had avoided his entire life, a reality check. Eliana, on the other hand, proved that true power doesn't come from a bank account or a title. It comes from the courage to walk away from what hurts you and the grace to rebuild from the ashes. She didn't just win the divorce. She won her soul back. Wow. What an ending. That final scene in the alleyway gave me absolute chills. It just goes to show that you should never celebrate until the ink is dry, and you should never underestimate someone's quiet strength. Eliana didn't need to scream or fight to win. She just needed to succeed. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of justice, karma, and ultimate redemption, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. Right now, it really helps the channel grow, so I can bring you more crazy stories like this one. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the truth always wins, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next part of our real-life drama series. What do you think? Did Blake deserve that job offer at the end, or was Eliana too nice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.